The air in Section 4 didn't just smell like sulfur. It smelled like impending judgment. Silas froze, his hand hovering over the hydraulic lever, his ears straining against the roar of the ventilation fans. It was a sound he hadn't heard in 30 years, a low, mournful groan from the rock roof above, like a sleeping giant waking up angry. He looked at the kid, barely 20 years old, standing in the shadow of the pillar. Silas realized with a sickening drop in his stomach that the mountain wasn't just settling. It was coming down, and they were on the wrong side of the fall. The alarm clock on the bedside table didn't buzz. It clicked. Clicked. A sharp, mechanical sound that cut through the silence of the pre-dawn dark like a pickaxe striking stone. Silas Vance didn't need the alarm, though he had been awake for 20 minutes. Lying still, staring at the ceiling he couldn't see, listening to the rhythm of his own breathing. In, a wheeze. Out, a rattle. The lungs of a man who had spent 40 years breathing air that had been chewed up by machinery and spat back out. He rolled out of bed, the mattress springs groaning in protest, careful not to wake Martha. She was curled on her side, a sliver of moonlight catching the gray in her hair. She slept the sleep of the worried, tense even in her dreams. Silas moved through the house by memory, his calloused fingers trailing along the hallway wallpaper. He knew every creak in the floorboards of this house. He had paid for every plank, every nail, and every shingle with cold dust. In the kitchen, the coffee pot was already cold from the night before. He didn't bother heating it. He drank it black and bitter, standing at the window, looking out at the valley below. The town of Blackwood Creek was buried under a thick blanket of fog. The only lights visible were the amber street lamps winding up the mountain road, leading toward the tipple. It looked like a trail of fireflies marching to a funeral. Silas pulled on his work boots. They were scarred, the leather worn smooth at the toes, the laces replaced with... He grabbed his lunch pail, the metal dented from a fall in '98. Tanned checked the contents. A bologna sandwich, an apple, and a note from Martha. He didn't read the note yet. That was for the darkness. That was for when he needed a reminder of why he was doing this. The drive to the mine was a ritual of silence. The old Ford truck rattled over the potholes, the heater blasting lukewarm air against his frozen knuckles. As he crested the ridge, the mine complex came into view. It was an industrial scar on the side of the mountain, a sprawling beast of conveyors, silos, and crushing machines. Ebon from Era, he could smell it. That distinct, metallic temps of raw coal. It smelled like money to some, and like death to others. To Silas, it just smelled like Tuesday. The locker room, or the bathhouse, as the old-timers called it, was alive with the low murmur of men resigning themselves to the shift. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of industrial soap. Silas opened his locker, the metal door clanging softly. He began the transformation. Off went the flannel and jeans. On came the stripes, the reflective mining heavy-duty coveralls, tent belt-heavy with the weight of the self-rescuer unit and the battery pack. "Morning, Sarge," a voice called out. It was Miller, a young buck with clean fingernails and a smile that hadn't been broken yet. Miller was new, barely 6 months underground. He looked at Silas with a mix of reverence and pity. "Morning, Miller," Silas grunted, checking the charge on his cap lamp. "Keep your head down today. Barometer is dropping. The roof gets heavy when the pressure changes." Miller nodded, taking the advice as gospel. "Yes, sir. We're on the retreat section today." "Right, retreat, mining." The phrase hung in the air between them. It was the most dangerous job in the industry. You carve out the coal, leaving pillars of coal to hold up the mountain roof. Then, when you've reached the end, you work your way backward, removing those pillars one by one, letting the mountain collapse behind you as you run. It was like stealing teeth from a dragon's mouth while it was waking up. "Yeah," Silas said, slamming his locker shut. "We're robbing pillars, so don't get comfortable. We move fast, and we move careful." The ride down the elevator to the cage was a descent into another world. The sunlight disappeared, swallowed by the shaft. The temperature dropped, stabilizing at a constant, damp 55 degrees. The men stood shoulder to shoulder, a brotherhood of shadows. As the cage hit the bottom with a jarring thud, the lights of the tunnel stretched out before them, miles of darkness pierced only by the dancing beams of their cap lamps. Silas took a breath, tasting the rock dust. He was home. 5 hours into the shift, the continuous miner machine was roaring, a mechanical beast tearing into the seam with carbide teeth. The noise was deafening, a physical pressure that vibrated in your chest. Silas was operating the remote, standing back in the safe zone, watching the shuttle car maneuver into position. But while his eyes were on the coal, his mind drifted back to the argument at the kitchen table 2 nights ago. It had been about money. It was always about money. The medical bills for his hip surgery had piled up, sitting on the counter like a stack of accusations. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was Caleb. His son. "I'm not going to college, Dad," Caleb had said, his jaw set in that stubborn line that was exactly like Silas's. "I can make good money at the mine. I can help with the bills." Silas had slammed his fist on the table, rattling the silverware. "You are not going down that hole. Caleb, I gave 40 years of my life to that darkness so you could stand in the light. You think this is a life? You think coughing up black spit every morning is a badge of honor? It's honest work," Caleb had shot back. "It's a slow death," Silas had roared. "I'm doing one last run, one last contract on the pillar extraction. That bonus pays off the house and pays for your first semester. You take the money and you go. You don't look back." The memory burned hotter than the machinery. Silas wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of black grime. He looked at the roof bolts above him. They were the only thing keeping millions of tons of Appalachian sandstone from crushing them flat. He needed this shift. He needed the bonus. He needed to buy his son's freedom. "Sarge, we got a situation." The voice crackled over the radio, snapping Silas back to the present. It was the section foreman. Silas clicked his radio. "Go ahead. The sensory readings on Pillar 6 are spiking. We're seeing heavy convergence. The roof is sagging faster than we calculated." Silas looked down the tunnel, toward Pillar 6. That was the key support. If that went before they were ready, the domino effect would trigger a massive collapse across the entire section. "Pull the boys back," Silas ordered, his voice steady despite the spike in his heart rate. "Shut down the miner. We back out now." "But Sarge, we're only 10 feet from the quota mark. The bonus, ... "To hell with the bonus," Silas barked. "The mountain is talking. Listen to it." The silence that followed the shutdown of the machinery was terrifying. Without the roar of the engines, the sounds of the earth became amplified. A pinging sound, like hail on a tin roof. That was the rock strata, splintering under pressure. Then a low boom, deep and resonant, vibrating through the soles of their boots. "Move! Move! Move!" Silas waved his light frantically, signaling the crew to retreat toward the main haulage way. Miller was fumbling with a cable, his boot caught in a loop of heavy wire. Silas saw the panic in the kid's eyes. The white of his eyes was the brightest thing in the tunnel. Silas didn't hesitate. He sprinted back toward the face, toward the danger. He grabbed Miller by the harness and yanked him free. "Run, son. Go." Miller scrambled away, disappearing into the dust cloud. Silas turned to follow, but then he heard it. The snap. It sounded like a gunshot from a high-caliber rifle. The main roof bolt above Pillar 6 sheared off. Time seemed to slow down. Silas looked up and saw the ceiling plate crack. Dust poured down like a waterfall. He knew the physics of it. He knew he had less than 2 seconds. He dove toward the crosscut, a small alcove carved into the side of the tunnel for electrical gear. As he hit the ground, the world ended. The roar was absolute. It wasn't just noise, it was pressure. The wind blast from the collapse knocked the wind out of him, slamming him against the rock wall. The lights went out. The sound of grinding stone filled his head, a violent gnashing of teeth as the mine swallowed itself. And then silence. Absolute, heavy, suffocating silence. Silas lay in the dark, coughing, the dust filling his mouth like dry flour. He reached up to his helmet. The light was smashed. He fumbled for his backup flashlight on his belt. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from the adrenaline crash. He clicked the backup light. A thin, yellow beam cut through the thick dust. Wall, rubble. He was sealed, and the crosscut had saved him from being crushed, but the collapse had blocked the exit. He was trapped in a stone box, 10 feet wide and 20 feet long, buried 800 feet beneath the surface of the earth. The first hour was purely tactical. Silas checked his resources. 1 bottle of water, half full. His lunch pail, crushed but accessible. His self-rescuer Uniton oxygen generator good for 1 hour of breathable air if the carbon monoxide levels spiked. He checked the air monitor on his chest. The numbers were dancing, but holding steady. The ventilation was cut off, but the deadly gas hadn't flooded his pocket yet. He sat down, his back against the cold coal seam. The panic tried to rise up, a cold hand gripping his throat. He forced it down. Panic burns oxygen, he told himself. Panic kills. He thought about the note in his lunch pail. He pried the dented metal lid open. The apple was bruised, the sandwich flattened. The note was folded into a small square. He opened it with trembling fingers, shining the weak beam of his light on the paper. "Don't work too hard, old man. We're making pot roast tonight. Love, M. Pot roast." The mundanity of it broke his heart. He could smell the onions and carrots simmering. He could see the steam rising in the kitchen. The third hour brought the ghosts. In the absolute darkness, the mind begins to invent things. Silas started to hear sounds that weren't there. The sound of a pickaxe tapping, the sound of his father's voice. His father had died in a mine just like this one, 3 counties over, back in '82. "You dig deep enough, Silas, you find the devil," his father had said. "I ain't finding the devil today," Pup Silas whispered to the empty rock. "I got a pot roast waiting." He tapped on the roof, bolt above him. Clang! 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 The miner's code, 3 taps. Signal for help. He waited. Silence. He tapped again. Clang, clang. He did this for what felt like hours. His arm grew heavy. The air was getting stale, warmer, thicker. The carbon dioxide was building up. His head began to throb, a slow, rhythmic pounding behind his eyes. He thought of Caleb. He thought of the argument. The guilt washed over him. If he died down here, Caleb would definitely go into the mines. He would do it to support his mother. He would take Silas's place in the dark. No, Silas rasped. He stood up, dizzy. He grabbed a piece of slate and slammed it against the metal water pipe running along the floor. Bung, bung, bung. I am not leaving them, he screamed, his voice cracking. You hear me, you son of a bitch, Mountain. You didn't get me then, and you don't get me now. He hit the pipe until his hands bled. He hit it until the exhaustion took his legs out from under him. He slumped against the wall, the flashlight beam flickering, dying. The darkness returned. He closed his eyes. He stopped fighting. He started drifting. He saw the kitchen table. He saw Caleb holding a college acceptance letter. He saw Martha smiling, her face unlined by worry. It's okay, he thought. I'm tired. I'm just so tired. Thump. Silas's eyes snapped open. Was it a heartbeat or the mountain? Thump, thump, thump. It was rhythmic. It was mechanical. It wasn't coming from his head. It was coming from the other side of the ruble pile. Silas scrambled to the pipe. He picked up his rock. Bang, bang. Bang, he pressed his ear to the cool stone. A voice, muffled, distorted, but undeniable. Dot, dot, dot here. Dot, signal, dot, 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 confirm, dot, dot, dot. Tears, hot and gritty with coal dust, cut tracks down Silas's cheeks. I'm here, he croaked, though he knew they couldn't hear his voice. He banged on the pipe again. The digging started. It was the sweetest sound he had ever heard, the sound of machinery, of men working, of brotherhood. It took 4 hours. 4 hours of listening to the grind of the rescue drill. When the breakthrough finally came, it wasn't dramatic. It was a small hole, the size of a fist, punching through the top of the ruble. A beam of bright, lead lights shot through, blinding him. Sarge, you in there? It was Miller. The kid came back. I'm here, Miller, Silas whispered, shielding his eyes. I'm here. Hang tight, Sarge. We're widening the hole. We got the medics. We got everybody. They pulled him out, feet first. The tunnel on the other side was crowded with men rescuers, shift buddies. The foremen. They were covered in sweat and grime, their faces masks of exhaustion and relief. They put him on a stretcher, but Silas pushed the medic away. I can walk, he said. He couldn't, not really, but he needed to stand. He needed to walk out of that tomb on his own 2 feet. Supported by Miller and the foreman, Silas Vance made the long walk to the cage. The ride-up seemed to take a lifetime, but when the cage doors opened, the assault of the senses was overwhelming. The smell of fresh aerial air, smelling of pine and rain and diesel, the sound of crickets, and the light. It was night-time, but the floodlights of the mine yard were blazing, and there, standing by the ambulance, pushing past the security guards, was Martha and Caleb. Martha didn't scream. She didn't run. She just collapsed into him as he stepped off the cage. She buried her face in his coal-stained chest, sobbing. Silas looked over her shoulder at his son. Caleb looked pale, terrified, staring at his father like he was a ghost returning from the war. Silas reached out a shaking, blackened hand and gripped Caleb's shoulder. "You see this?" Silas whispered, gesturing to the dirt, the blood, the chaos. "You see this darkness?" Caleb nodded, tears in his eyes. "You go to school?" Silas said, his voice hard as iron. "You go to school, and you don't ever come back here. You promise me." Caleb looked at the mine entrance, then back at his father. "I promise, Dad, I promise." 6 months later, the front porch of the Vance house. The sun is setting, casting a golden glow over the valley. The air is crisp. Silas sits in his rocking chair. He breathes easier now, though the cough still visits him in the mornings. The cane leaning against the railing is his new companion, a souvenir from the nerve damage in his leg. He isn't wearing coveralls. He's wearing a button-down shirt. He holds a letter in his hand. It's a tuition receipt for the University of West Virginia. Paid in full, the settlement from the mine company for the accident, combined with his disability pension, covered it. It was a high price to pay his health, his mobility, but the debt was settled. He watches a car drive away down the winding road. Caleb's car. He's heading back to campus for the fall semester. Silas takes a sip of his coffee. It tastes better than it used to. He looks out toward the mountain ridge. The mine is still there, still humming, still eating men and spitting out coal. But it won't get his son. Silas Vance closes his eyes and listens, not to the mountain, but to the wind in the trees. The sound of peace. He smiles, just a little. "Shifts over," he whispers to himself. "Shifts over."